Welcome to another deep dive, and this time we're going all the way back to the roots of modern philosophy. We're talking about Franz Brentano, the guy whose ideas, well, really kind of shaped how we even think about the mind.
Yeah, he's a big deal, that's for sure.
He even influenced, huge names like Husserl and even Freud, right?
Yeah, you could say Brentano's work is like a philosophical spring, it feeds into all these different streams of thought.
So where do we even begin? I mean, the guy worked on the philosophy of psychology, wrestled with this whole intentionality thing, and even made a splash in logic and ethics and even aesthetics.
Yeah, pretty much. He wasn't just some armchair philosopher.
What was it about his approach that made him so different, so unique?
Well, Brentano really believed that philosophy should be as rigorous as science. So instead of just, relying on pure thought, he insisted on observation, description, and using inductive reasoning.
So more like a naturalist studying a new species or something.
Exactly like that. And he was a pioneer, in really establishing psychology as its own separate science.
So how did he approach that?
He argued that there were two, intertwined ways to study the mind.
Okay.
Genetic psychology, which is kind of like what we call experimental psychology today.
Okay.
And then descriptive psychology, which focused on introspection and, that first-person experience.
So one's looking at the mechanics, the other, the feeling of thinking.
Exactly.
Fascinating.
Now, get ready for this, because here comes Brentano's most famous contribution to philosophy. Intentionality.
Okay.
He argued that every single mental act, every thought, every feeling, every perception, it's all about something. And this about-moreness, that's what he called intentionality.
I think I'm following, but can you give me an example?
Sure. So think about a cat. The actual cat might be on your couch, all curled up, but your thought about the cat, that image you have in your mind, that's intentional. It's pointed at that cat like it's the object of your thought.
So even if I'm daydreaming about winning the lottery, even though that's not actually happening, my thought is still about that potential future event.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But this brings up a really interesting question, one that even Brentano himself struggled with.
What's that?
What about thinking about things that don't exist? Can we have thoughts about unicorns or, square circles or even fictional characters?
Oh, that's getting pretty meta.
Right. So how do you even answer that? Brentano really struggled with this. His early work, it left the existence of those intentional objects kind of fuzzy,
Yeah.
But later, he came up with this idea of quasi-relations.
Quasi-relations, okay.
Where mental acts, they kind of relate to these objects, but not in a way that actually means they need to exist.
So my mind can be pointing towards a unicorn, even though there aren't any unicorns actually, prancing around out there.
Exactly.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and this problem of the intentional object, it became this springboard for his students, like Minong and Husserl.
Yeah.
Each of them kind of branched off into their own fascinating explorations.
That's so cool.
But for now, let's stick with Brentano himself. One of his more, I guess you could say, radical claims was that there was no such thing as an unconscious thought.
Wait, really? How's that even possible? I mean, I can't consciously keep track of every little thought that, pops into my head.
This is where Brentano's concept of inner perception comes in.
Okay.
He argued that every mental act, it's not just directed outward, but it's also aware of itself.
Okay.
So, it's kind of like a mirror reflecting back on the very act of seeing.
So I'm not just thinking about the cat. I'm also aware that I'm thinking about the cat.
Yeah.
That's a lot to, hold in your head at once.
Right. It is a lot. But this inner perception, it means that no thought can be truly, unconscious.
Okay.
We might not pay attention to every thought, sure, but the awareness is always there.
Like a background hum.
Exactly, like that. And this leads us to another key concept, the unity of consciousness.
You mean I can't think two totally separate thoughts at the same time?
Right. Brentano argued that consciousness is always a single unified experience. Even when it feels like we're multitasking, like listening to music while you're cooking dinner.
Right.
He'd say those mental acts are blending together into one experience.
Okay.
He called this this fusion of mental acts collectives.
Collectives, okay.
So, different instruments all playing together to make a single melody.
I like that.
That's kind of how different thoughts weave into our unified experience.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this all fits together.
Good.
But where does all this thinking about thinking lead us? How did Brentano build on these, foundational ideas?
Well, he categorized mental phenomena into three basic types.
Okay, let's hear it.
presentations, judgments, and then, well, he called them phenomena of love and hate, but we usually just call them emotions.
Presentations, judgments, and emotions. Those do feel like the building blocks of, well, pretty much any human experience, really.
Exactly. And let's break those down a bit.
Okay.
So presentations, those are like the simplest acts of awareness. Seeing a tree, imagining a beach, remembering a childhood memory, those are all presentations. It's simply being conscious of something.
So it's like the raw data of experience before we start trying to make sense of it.
Exactly. Then we have judgments, where we go beyond just being aware, and we actually take a stance towards whatever's being presented.
Yep.
Is that tree tall? Is that beach beautiful? Was that memory a happy one? Judgments are like acts of accepting or rejecting, believing or disbelieving.
So judgments add like a layer of evaluation on top of the raw data from the presentations.
Exactly. Now, things get even more interesting with emotions. Brentano made a pretty bold claim. Emotions can be right or wrong, correct or incorrect.
Hold on. Right or wrong emotions. Isn't that like subjective? One person's joy could be another person's terror, right?
That's what most people think, but Brentano, he argued that emotions are more than just feelings. He thought they have a kind of fittingness to them.
Okay.
So, like, if your fear is proportionate to, the actual threat, then it's a correct emotion. But if you're terrified of a harmless bunny rabbit...
That fear would be incorrect because it doesn't match up with, what's really happening.
Exactly. It's all about whether the emotion is justified by the object it's directed towards. And this is really important for his ethics, which we'll explore later.
Oh, yeah, we definitely have to get into that.
Yeah. But first, let's dig a little deeper into these three categories and see how they all play out in our daily lives.
Sounds good. I'm ready. So we've got these three building blocks, right? The presentations, the judgments, and the emotions. But how do they all actually work together? Is it like a step-by-step process or more like, a tangled web?
I'd say it's more of a dynamic interplay, like a dance between these different mental faculties.
Yeah, I like that.
So imagine, you're walking through a forest and you see this flash of red.
Okay, yeah.
That's a presentation. And your mind, it instantly forms the judgment. That's a bird. And then, if you're like a bird enthusiast, you might feel a surge of joy, an emotion directed towards that beautiful creature.
Yeah. So it's not just like one thought at a time. It's this constant flow of presentations and judgments and emotions all shaping like how we experience the world.
Exactly. And this is where Brentano really, he stirs the philosophical pot, you could say.
Okay, how so?
Well, he argued that our understanding of things like truth, goodness, and beauty, those fundamental philosophical concepts.
Yeah.
He said those are rooted in psychology.
Hold on. Is he saying that like what's true for me might not be true for you? The truth is just, matter of opinion.
Well, this is where things get tricky. Brentano, he kind of walked a tightrope here.
Okay.
You see, he got accused of psychologism.
Psychologism?
Which is this view that, logic and ethics, they're just products of our minds. They're subjective, relative. But Brentano, he absolutely denied this.
Okay, so how did he get out of that? How can truth be, objective if it all starts in our minds?
He argued that while the process of judging, that's psychological. That happens in our minds. But the content of a judgment, whether it's true or false, that's determined by something outside of us. It's determined by, how the world actually is.
Okay, so it's like we're all looking at the world through our own mental lenses, but there's still a shared reality out there that we're all trying to see.
Exactly, precisely. And this idea of correctness in judgments and emotions, this was key for Brentano. It wasn't enough to just feel something. The feeling actually had to be justified by the object itself.
So like a feeling could be wrong.
In a way, yeah. And this is especially important for his ethics.
Let's talk about that. How did Brentano connect all these ideas about the mind to like how we should live our lives?
For Brentano, good actions, it wasn't just about blindly following rules. It was about having the right emotional response. So a good action, it's one that's worthy of love, something we should feel positive about, but not because, someone told us to, but because it's just like intrinsically good.
So morality isn't just about, doing the right thing, but also feeling the right way about what we do.
Right. It adds a whole other dimension to how we make ethical decisions.
It does, yeah.
And this whole emphasis on the correctness of emotions makes Brentano, like a forerunner to what we now call fitting attitude theories of value.
Fitting attitude theories, okay?
Yeah, it's not just about what we do, it's about having the appropriate emotional responses to things.
That's fascinating. It really makes you think about whether, how we react to things emotionally, if it's always justified, or if we need to sometimes, recalibrate how we feel to like better match how things really are.
That's a good point.
But did Brentano just focus on psychology and ethics? He seems like the kind of thinker who would, have something to say about everything.
You're right, he was a really wide-ranging thinker. Brentano, he also made significant contributions to logic and metaphysics, for example. He even had a really fascinating, though, kind of controversial take on the history of philosophy itself.
Oh, I got to hear this. What was his take on, like, the evolution of philosophical thought?
He believed that it kind of unfolds in these cycles.
Cycles, okay.
He proposed that there are 4 phases. You have a creative burst, then a practical phase, then a skeptical turn, and then a mystical phase. So imagine like a wave rising and crashing, but then it rises again. And each time it reshapes the shore, of philosophical thought.
Wow, that's like a philosophical roller coaster.
Kind of, yeah. So take the ancient Greeks, for example. They had this incredible burst of creativity. They were questioning everything, like the nature of reality, the good life, all of it. And this led to, practical applications in politics, ethics, and the arts. But then you have the skeptics. They start to come in and question whether we can really know anything for sure.
And then the mystical phase, that's where people start looking for answers outside of reason.
Exactly. They turn to intuition, revelation, maybe even spiritual experiences. And from this mystical phase, a new creative burst emerges. And then the whole cycle starts over again.
It's a really interesting way to think about the history of philosophy. I mean, I don't know if all historians would agree with it, but it's definitely thought-provoking.
For sure.
But speaking of historical figures, Brentano was known for his reism.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Can you explain what that is and how it shaped his views?
Sure. So reism, it's basically Brentano's commitment to ontological simplicity. He thought that only concrete individual things actually exist. So no abstract entities, no disembodied properties floating around out there. Think of it like this. The world is made up of things, not concepts.
So no Platonic forms or universal essences in Brentano's world?
Nope, not at all. He was all about the particular, the individual, the things that we can actually point to and experience. And this really impacted how he looked at substances and accidents.
Just to remind our listeners, substances are the fundamental things that exist, while accidents are their properties or characteristics, right?
You got it.
Okay.
Now, most philosophers, they see substances and accidents as totally distinct categories. But Brentano, being a recist, he had a different take.
Okay, what was his take?
He saw accidents as real things, but not as separate entities. He argued that an accident, it actually contains the substance as a part.
Wait, so the accident contains the substance?
Yeah, think about a red apple.
Okay, a red apple.
The apple itself is the substance. The redness, that's an accident. But for Brentano, the redness isn't just a property of the apple. It's a thing that includes the apple as part of it.
So the redness, it's not just a description. It's a package deal with the apple inside.
Exactly. And if you were to paint that apple green, the redness, it would stop existing. And then this new accident, the greenness, that comes into being.
Yeah.
But the apple itself, the substance, it stays the same the whole time.
Okay, I think I'm starting to get it.
Yeah.
But why is this so important? How does this Reationist view of substances and accidents connect to Brentano's other ideas?
Well, it shows his commitment to grounding philosophy and what's concrete, what's observable.
Right.
He wanted to avoid these speculative metaphysics that talk about, unseen realms or abstract entities. For him, it was all about starting with the world that we can actually experience.
So no big theories about the ultimate nature of reality. Just a focus on the things that we can actually see and touch.
Exactly. And this emphasis on empirical grounding, it's one reason why Brentano is considered a forerunner of both phenomenology, which focuses on our direct experience of the world, and also analytic philosophy, which is known for its really rigorous language-based approach.
It's amazing how one thinker can have such a diverse legacy. Influencing these movements that seem so different on the surface.
It really speaks to the depth and complexity of Brentano's thought. But before we get too caught up in his historical impact, Let's circle back to one of his most, I guess you could say, enduring contributions, intentionality.
Oh, yeah, that whole aboutness of every thought thing.
That's
I'm
it.
still trying to wrap my head around, like, what all that means. It suggests that our minds are constantly, like, reaching out, engaging with the world, even when we're, lost in thought.
That's one of the most profound implications of intentionality, yeah. It challenges that view of the mind as like just a passive receiver of information. Instead, it suggests that the mind is active, it's intentional, it's always directed towards something. Even when we're, daydreaming or fantasizing, our minds are still engaging with objects, even if they are imaginary ones.
This makes me think of how we often talk about, living in our heads.
Right.
But Brentano's theory, it suggests that even in our most introspective moments, we're never really detached from the world.
Exactly. And this connection between the mind and the world, this is really central to understanding Brentano's philosophy more broadly. He saw the mind as like this bridge between our inner experiences and that external reality that we're always trying to like grasp and understand.
Yeah, it's like our minds are always casting this net, trying to like catch and understand everything around us. But speaking of catching things, wasn't Brentano known for being an amazing teacher too? Like a real intellectual fisherman bringing in all these brilliant minds?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. His classroom, it was like a breeding ground for new philosophical ideas.
Mhm.
He mentored, I mean, some of the biggest names in 20th century philosophy. Husserl, Meinong, Twardowski, just to name a few.
It's like he had this talent for spotting potential, for nurturing these minds that would go on to really shape, philosophical thought for generations.
Yeah, and it's remarkable, he actually encouraged his students to think for themselves, even if that meant like disagreeing with him. He
Mhm.
fostered this real spirit of challenging established ideas that wasn't just accepted, it was expected.
So it wasn't about like creating a bunch of little mini Brentanos,
Yep.
but more about kind of igniting these individual sparks that could then go on to, blaze their own trails.
Exactly. Yeah. His classroom, it was less about dogma and more about dialogue, this constant back and forth where ideas were tested and refined and sometimes even completely overturned.
It's inspiring. It really makes you realize that intellectual growth, it comes from stepping outside your comfort zone, right?
Yep.
From being willing to challenge even the ideas that you like hold most dear.
And Brentano, he really embodied that spirit. He was constantly engaging with his critics, refining his own theories, never like content with these easy answers.
Yeah.
His work, it wasn't static. It was this living, evolving thing, always open to being revised and improved.
Which makes you wonder if Brentano was like around today, what would he be, wrestling with? What new directions would he be pushing philosophy in?
It's tough to say for sure, but given his fascination with the mind and its relationship to the world, I think he'd be really interested in the latest developments in like cognitive science, neuroscience, maybe even artificial intelligence. Like maybe he'd be asking, what does it even mean to be human, in an age of increasingly intelligent machines? Or how do these new technologies challenge our understanding of consciousness and intentionality?
Wow, those are some big questions. It makes you realize that Brentano's work, it wasn't just about like solving these philosophical puzzles of the past. It was about giving us this framework for grappling with these, always evolving challenges of understanding ourselves and the world that we live in.
Exactly. And his legacy, it goes beyond just, the specific answers that he gave us.
Okay.
It's about his whole approach to philosophy. Rigorous, empirical, but also open to the mysteries and complexities of being human.
It's that mix of like head and heart,
Yeah.
the scientific spirit, but combined with this deep, appreciation for the subjective.
Sure.
That's what makes Brentano such an enduring figure. He reminds us that philosophy isn't just about these abstract theories. It's about grappling with the fundamental questions that shape our lives, our values and how we understand the world.
Well said. And as we wrap up this deep dive into Franz Brentano, I hope everyone listening comes away not just with a newfound appreciation for his ideas, but also a renewed sense of curiosity about the world and the mind that tries to understand it. Because in the end, Brentano's greatest contribution might not be a specific theory or argument, but that inspiration he gives us to, keep asking questions, keep exploring, and keep pushing the boundaries of what we know.
Brentano definitely gave us a lot to think about. He was a true philosophical trailblazer, and he really illuminated some of the most, profound mysteries of the human mind. I think as we navigate the complexities of the 21st century, his insights into intentionality, consciousness, and just the nature of experience, they offer these really valuable tools for making sense of ourselves and the world that we inhabit. So keep exploring, keep questioning, and who knows, maybe you'll discover your own, philosophical breakthroughs, all inspired by the enduring legacy of Franz Brentano. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive, and we'll catch you next time.